Did Atlantic actually release that project?
Yeah, but they didn't treat it like it was an album, which was just their way of not paying me a whole lot.
So to rewind, so you're working very closely with Wiz, obviously, on his music, and then the deal comes along. You get signed, and now all the business is handled by the label, and the label's kind of the intermediary right now. And now you got to probably deal with a whole bunch of people you didn't know and you didn't come up with. So how did that dynamic change? Was that a challenge?
It was a challenge, especially, you know, he got signed first to Warner Brothers. We hammered it out with them for, you know, a good year. And that whole situation just sort of dissolved because things weren't happening and he wasn't happy there. And at that point, it was sort of back to the drawing board for us. But then when he signed to Atlantic, you know, very suddenly there was all these producers that they were sort of throwing at him, A&Rs, and all these different people involved that then had a say in what was going on. And there was a moment, you know, early on in that where I just started to feel a little lost in the shuffle. The lesson that I sort of took from that was, you know, to just continue to find ways to make myself indispensable to the situation, which meant I had to keep pushing myself to grow and to get better at what I was doing, just to make sure that I was still adding something to it. Because now I was, you know, I suddenly went from competing with like local producers or producers that were, you know, sort of close to us to like every producer in the world. But that took my relationship with Wiz, you know, to keep me a part of the fold. Because when he was working on the first album for Atlantic, there was that moment when I sort of felt like, man, am I even going to get on this album? And it came down to him, you know, deciding that he wanted to go back home, work with me and work with some of the other Pittsburgh guys, you know, to knock out the core of the album, which he ended up doing. That's been the pattern since then.
When the very first Warner Brothers single came out, I was working in radio, and I remember we were supporting that record heavily. Johnny Giuliano produced that record. Then his Atlantic debut was produced by Stargate, I believe, right?
Yep.
And so it was a major difference in sound, you could tell. So what was so dope to me was to see your name back on so many subsequent Wiz Khalifa Atlantic Records projects.
You know, it's really mostly thanks to Wiz, you know, and just him continuing to you know, appreciate what I was bringing to the table for him and, you know, to just respect that relationship enough to keep coming back to me because, you know, when you're in a machine like Atlantic, they're going to reach out to every hot producer on the planet, you know, and throw them at whatever project, you know. But Wiz has always had like a pretty, you know, defined vision of where he's wanted an album to go. Even that said, you know, I mean, our relationship stays the same, but, you know, it's still really a struggle for me to get a single or, you know, do some of the bigger records. And part of that might just be, you know, the types of tracks that him and I do when we get together. They're just not always that sound, you know what I mean?
Beyond Wiz, just to talk about your discography as a whole, I've noticed that in your discography, you really focused on working with artists that, from my perspective, you most likely have pretty direct access to. Mac Miller, Snoop Dogg, Juicy J. Do you tend to work with artists in person? I mean, as an engineer, do you bring a lot of these artists into the studio with you, and that's kind of your strategy for longevity? Yeah,
I mean, that's what's always worked out the best. You know, just like the sending beats around thing has never really worked too great for me. I mean, it's led to a few things here and there, but 9 out of 10 times, you know, it's just been a more reliable way to actually get a cut with somebody, to be in the studio with them, whether that was in my place or, you know, in LA. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think I definitely much prefer to work with somebody that I've got a relationship with. I don't particularly love just jumping into a session with someone I've never met, popping open a folder of beats and, you know, running through 20 of them to try and find a vibe. It's like, you know, I like to just sort of know where someone's coming from and have them have an idea of where I'm coming from, and, you know, we can build something in the studio from scratch. And that just tended to be a better experience, and I think it you know, turns out to be a better record at the end of the day, at least for me.
Am I crazy, or did you produce a project for Snow the Product a few years back?
Yeah, I did, actually, because when Wiz's first A&R left Atlantic, he transitioned into a new one. That A&R was also working with Snow, and he decided he was going to bring her into Pittsburgh to work with us. I think with the idea being like she was really new and young at the time, and it was like, here's this dude that, developed Mac and Wiz, and let's see if, he can develop her. And it was cool. I mean, we definitely got along, and, we did a bunch of records. We just haven't gotten up much since then.
Did Atlantic actually release that project through the Atlantic machine?
Yeah, but I don't know if they called it a mixtape exactly, but they didn't treat it like it was an album, which was just their way of not paying me a whole lot.
You answered my question. That's the burning question.
That's happened with Wiz albums too. Yeah. The Khalifa album, I don't know if they called it a street album. They came up with some really clever name that essentially meant everyone involved, you're going to get paid, half what you normally do. It's a thing. I mean, it's I've seen it happen really more often in the last few years. Anything to save a buck for these labels. Yeah,
they're really playing it safe by dropping these kind of non-committal projects, and then the second something takes off, then they claim that one record or whatever, and suddenly that record is extracted from the Street album, and it's their hit single. It's funny. Exactly. It's just cool to get your perspective on it because you're actually affected by this.